Hello everyone, welcome back to this live session in which I read the book *Sapiens* and you understand some new vocabulary. And so yeah, so today's chapter is about uh, so we are reading it. Yeah, imperial retirement. The topic is imperial retirement, and the chapter is a permanent revolution. Right? Okay, so let's start. It is perhaps debatable. It is perhaps debatable whether violence within state has decreased or increased since 1945. What nobody can deny is that international violence has dropped to an all-time low. Perhaps the most obvious example is the collapse of European empire. Throughout history, empires have crushed rebellions with an iron fist, and when its day came, a sinking empire used all its might to save himself, usually collapsing into bloodbath. Its final demise generally led to anarchy and war of succession. In 1945, most empires have opted for peaceful early retirement. The process of collapse became relatively swift, calm, and orderly. In 1945, Britain ruled a quarter of the globe. 30 years later, it 30 years later it ruled just a few small islands. In the intervening decades, it retreated from most of its colonies in a peaceful and orderly manner. Though in some places such as Malaya and Kenya, the British tried to hang on by force of arms, in most places they accepted the end of empire with a sigh rather than with the temporary interim. They focused their efforts not on retaining power but on transferring it to as smoothly as possible. At least some of the praise usually heaped on Mahatma Gandhi for his non-violent creed is actually owed to the British Empire. Despite many years of bitter and often violent struggle, when the end of Raj came, the Indians did not have to fight the British and the stress of Delhi and Kolkata. The empire's place were taken by a slew of independent states, most of which have since enjoyed stable borders and have for the most part lived peacefully alongside their neighbors. True, tens of thousands of people perished at the hands of threatened British Empire on in several hotspots. Its retreat led to the eruption of ethnic conflicts that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Yet, when compared to the long term historical average, the British withdrawal was an exemplar of peace and order. The French Empire was more stubborn. Its collapse involved uh, bloody rearguard action in Vietnam and Algeria that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Yet the French too retreated from the rest of their dominions quickly and peacefully, leaving behind orderly states rather than a chaotic free for all. The Soviet collapse in 1989 was even more peaceful. Despite the eruption of ethnic conflicts in Balkans, Caucasus, and Central Asia, never before has such a mighty empire dispersed so swiftly and so quietly. The Soviet Empire of 1989 had suffered no military defeat in Afghanistan, no external invasion, no rebellion, nor even large-scale Martin Luther King-style campaign of civil disobedience. The Soviets still had millions of soldiers, tens of thousands of tanks and aeroplanes, and enough nuclear weapons to wipe out the whole of humankind several times over. The Red Army and the other Warsaw-packed armies remained loyal. Had the last Soviet ruler, Mikhail Gorbachev, given the order, the Red Army would have opened fire on subjugated masses. Yet the Soviet elite and the communists resigning through most of Eastern Europe, Romania and Serbia were the exceptions, chose not to use even a tiny fraction of this military power. When its members realized that communism was bankrupt, they renounced force, admitted their failures, and packed their suitcases and went off. Gorbachev and his colleagues gave up without a struggle not only the Soviet conquest of the Second World War, but also much the older Tsarist conquest in the Baltic, the Ukraine, and the Caucasus and Central Asia. It is chilling to contemplate what might have happened if Gorbachev had behaved like the Serbian leadership or like the French in Algeria. Okay, now the next topic is Pax Atomica. The independent state that came after these empires were remarkably uninterested in the war. With very few exceptions, since 1945 states no longer invade other states in order to conquer and swallow them. Such conquest had been the bread and the butter of political history. Since time immemorial, it was how most great empires were established and how most rulers and populations expected things to stay. But campaigns of conquest like those of Romans, Mongols, or Ottoman cannot take place today anywhere in the world. Since 1945, no independent country recognized by the UN has been conquered and wiped out of the no independent country recognized by the UN has been conquered and wiped out of the map. Limited international wars still occurs from time to time, and millions still die in war. But wars are no longer the norm. Many people believe that disappearance of international wars is unique to the rich democracies of Western Europe. In fact, peace reached Europe after it prevailed in other parts of the world. Thus, the last serious international war between South America and countries were the Peru Ecuador War of 1941 and the Bolivia Paraguay War of 1932 and 5. And before that, there hadn't been a serious war between South American countries since 1879 and 84, with Chile on the side and Bolivia and Peru on the other side. We seldom think of Arab world as particularly peaceful. Yet, only once since the Arab countries won their independence has one of them mounted a full-scale invasion of another, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990. There have been quite a few border clashes. Example: Syria vs Jordan in 1970. Many armed interventions of one in the affair of another. Syria in Lebanon, numerous civil wars, Algeria, Yemen, Libya, and an abundance of corps and rivers. Yet there have been no full-scale international war among the Arab states except the Gulf War. Even widening the scope to include the entire Muslim world, it's on only one more example: the Iran-Iraq War. There was no Turkey-Iran war, Pakistan-Afghanistan war, or Indonesia-Malaysia war. In Africa, things are far less rosy. But even but even there, most conflicts are civil wars and coups. Since Africa states won their independence in 1960 and 1970s, very few countries have invaded one another in hope of conquest. There have been periods of relative calm before, for example, in Europe between 1871 and 1914, and they are always net battling. But this time it is difficult. For real peace, it is not the mere absence of war. Real peace is the impossibility of war. Impossibility. Impossible means impossible. There has never been real peace in the world. Between 1871 and 1914, a European war remained a plausible eventuality, and the exception of war dominated the thinking of armies, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike. This forbidding war, true for all other peaceful periods in history, an iron law of international politics decreed. For every two nearby polities, there is a plausible scenario that will cause them to go war against one another within 1 year. This law of the jungle was enforced in late 19th century Europe, in medieval Europe, in ancient China and classical Greek. If Sparta and Athens were at peace in 1450 BC, and there was plausible scenario that it would war by 449 BC. Today, humankind has broke the law of the jungle. There is at the last real peace and not just absence of war. For most polities, there is no plausible scenario leading to full-scale conflict within 1 year. What could lead to war between Germany and France next year, or between China and Japan, or between Brazil and Argentina? Some minor border clash might occur, but only are too apocalyptic. Apocalyptic. Apo, Apocalyptic meaning. In literature or movies, themes often include natural disaster, wars. Something involves the end of the world, catastrophic event. Truly pretty confusing. Collectivism, doom laden, and time. Could result in an old-fashioned full-scale war between Brazil and Argentina in 2014, with Argentinian armored divisions sweeping to the gates of Rio and Brazilian carpet bombers pulverizing the neighborhoods of Buenos Aires. Such war might still Europe between several PSF states, example between Israel and Syria, Ethiopia and Eritrea, or USA and Iran, but these are only the exception that prove the rule. The situation might of course change in the future, and with hindsight that the world of today might seem incredibly naive. Yet from a historical perspective, our very naivety is fascinating. Naivety means adjective for naive or adverb for naive, right? That's a noun, right? A lack of experience, wisdom, judgment. Innocency. Never before has peace been so prevalent that people could never imagine war. Scholars have sought to explain this subtle development in more books and articles than you ever read yourself, and they have identified several contributing factors. First and foremost, the price of oil has gone up dramatically. The Nobel Peace Prize, who earned all peace prizes, should have been should have been given to Robert Oppenheimer and his fellow architects of the atomic bomb. The price of oil has gone up dramatically. The Nobel Peace Prize, who earned all peace prizes, should have been given to Robert Oppenheimer and his fellow architects of the atomic bomb. Nuclear weapons have turned war between superpowers into collective suicide and made it impossible to seek world domination by force of arms. Secondly, while the price of war soared, its profits declined. For most of history, politics could enrich themselves by looting or annexing enemy territories. Most wealth consists of material things like fields, cattle, slaves, and gold. So it's easy to loot it or occupy it. Today, the wealth consists mainly of human capital and organizational know-how. Consequently, it is difficult to carry it off and conquer it by military force. Consider California. Its wealth was initially built on gold mines, but today it is built on silicon and celluloid Silicon Valley and celluloid hills of Hollywood. What happened if Chinese were to mount an armed invasion of California, land million soldiers on the beaches of San Francisco and storm Hill? They would gain little. There are no silicon mines in Silicon Valley. The wealth resides in the mind of Google engineers and Hollywood script doctors, directors, and special effects wizards. Who would be on the first who was in the first plane to Bangalore to Mumbai long before the Chinese tanks rolled into sunset Boulder? It is not coincidental that few full-scale international wars that still take place in the world, such as the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, occurs in place where wealth is old-fashioned material health. The Kuwaiti sheikhs could flee abroad, but the oil fields stayed put and were occupied. While war became less profitable, peace became more lucrative than ever. Lucrative means more volatile. Lucrative means more volatile. Yields good returns profitable. More profitable. In traditional agricultural economies, long distance trade and foreign investment were side stores. Consequently, peace brought little profit aside from avoiding the cost of war. If, say, in 1400 England and France were at peace, the French did not have to pay heavy war taxes and for destructive English invasions, but it did not benefit their wallets. In modern capitalist economies, foreign trades and investment have become all important. Peace therefore brings unique dividends. As long as China and USA are at peace, the Chinese can prosper by selling products to the US, trading in Wall Street and transferring US investments. Last but not least, tectonic shift has taken place in global political culture. Many lights in history, Huon, chieftains, Viking noblemen, and Aztec priests, for example, viewed war as a positive good. Others viewed it as evil but an inevitable one, which we had better turn to our advantage. Ours is the first time in history that the world is dominated by peace-loving elite politicians, business people, intellectuals, and artists who genuinely see war as both evil and avoidable. There were pacifists in the past, such as the early Christians, but in the rare cases that they gained power and tended to forget about their requirement to turn the other cheek. There is a positive feedback loop between all these four factors. The threat of nuclear holocaust fosters pacifism, while pacifism spreads war research and trade flourishes, and trade increases both the profits of peace and the cost of war. Over time, this feedback loop creates another obstacle to war, which may ultimately prove the most important of all. The tightening web of international connection erode the independence of most countries, lessening the chances that any one of them might single-handedly slip talks of war. Most countries no longer engage in full-scale war for the simple reason that they are no longer independent. Though citizens in Israel, Italy, Mexico, Thailand may have illusions of independence, the fact is that their government cannot conduct independent economic or foreign policy, and they are certainly incapable of initiating and conducting full-scale war on their own. As explained in Chapter 2, we are witnessing the formation of a global empire. Like previous empire, this one to enforces peace within its border, and since its border covered the entire globe, the world empire effectively enforces world peace. So, in the modern era, one of mindless slaughter, war, and operations typified by the trenches of the First World War and the nuclear mushrooms, Hiroshima, and the gory manias of Hitler and Stalin, or is it the era of peace optimized by the trenches never dug in South America or mushroom cloud that never appeared over Moscow and New York and the serene researches of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King? The answer is a matter of timing. It is sobering to realize how often our views of the past is distorted by the event of the last few years. If this chapter had been written in 1945 or 1962, it would probably have been much more glum. Since it was written in 2014, it takes a relatively buoyant approach to modern history. To satisfy both optimists and pessimists, we may conclude by saying that we are on the threshold of both heaven and hell, moving nervously between the gateway of one another and the anteroom of the other. History has still not decided whether we will end up string of consciousness it might send us rolling in either direction, right? Okay, now we are starting the next 19th chapter, which is and they lived happily. And they live happily ever after. Yeah. So the last 500 years have witnessed a breathtaking series of revolutions. The earth has been very interestingly ecological and historical sphere. The economy has grown exponentially and humankind today enjoys the kind of wealth that used to be stuff of fairy tales. Science and the industrial revolution have given humankind superhuman power and practically limitless energy. The social order has been completely transformed, as have politics, daily life, and human psychology. But are we happier? Did the wealth humankind accumulated over the last 5 centuries translate into a newfound contentment? Did the discovery of inexhaustible energy resources open before us inexhaustible source of bliss? Going further back, 70 have the 70 or so turbulent million since the cognitive revolution made the world a better place to live? Was the late Neil Armstrong whose footprints remain intact on the windless moon happier than the nameless hunter-gatherer who 30,000 years ago left her handprint on a wall in Sherwood Cave? If not, what was the point of developing agriculture, cities, writing, coinage, by science, and industry? Historians seldom ask such questions. They do not ask whether the citizens of Uruk or Babylon were happier than the foraging ancestor, whether the rise of Islam made Egyptians more pleased with their lives, or how the collapse of European empires in Africa have influenced the happiness of countless millions. Do not ask whether. Yet, these are the most important questions one can ask of history. Most current ideologies and political programs are based on rather flimsy ideas concerning the real source of human happiness. Nationalists believe that political self-determination is essential for our happiness. Communists postulate that everyone would be blissful under the dictatorship of the proletariat. Proletariat. Capitalists maintain that only the free market can ensure the greatest happiness of the greatest number by creating economic growth and material abundance and by teaching people to be self-reliant and enterprising. What would happen if serious research were to disprove these hypotheses? If economic growth and self-reliance do not make people happier, what's the benefit of capitalism? What if it turns out that citizens subject of large empires are generally happier than the citizens of independent states, and that, for example, Ghanaians were happier under British colony rule than under their own homegrown dictators? What would it say about the process of decolonization and the value of national self-determination? These are all hypothetical possibilities because so far historians have avoided asking those questions, not to mention answering them. They have researched the history of just about everything: politics, society, economics, gender, diseases, sexuality, food, clothing. Yet have some Yet they have seldom stopped to ask how they influence human happiness. Though few have studied the long-term history of happiness, almost every scholar and layperson has some vague preconception about it. In common view, human capabilities have increased throughout history. Since humans generally use their capabilities to alleviate miseries and fulfill aspiration, it follows that we must be happier than our medieval ancestors and they must have been happier than Stone Age hunter-gatherers. But this progressive account is unconvincing, as we have seen new aptitude, behavior, and skill do not necessarily make for a better life. When humans learn to form an agricultural revolution, their collective power to shape their environment increased. But the lot of many individual humans grew harsher. Peasants had to work harder than foragers to eke out less varied and nutritious food, and they were far more exposed to disease and exploitation. Similarly, the spread of European Empire greatly increased the collective power of humankind by circulating ideas, technologies, and crops, and opening new avenues of commerce. Yet, this was hardly good news for millions of Africans, Native Americans, and Aboriginal Australians. Given the proven human propensity for misusing power, it seems new to believe that the more cloud people have, the happier they will be. Some challenges, some challengers of this view take a diametrically opposed position. They argue for a reverse correlation between human capabilities and power corrupts. They say as humankind gain more and more power, it creates an old mechanistic world instituted to our real needs. Evolution molded our minds and bodies to the life of hunter-gatherers. Transition first to agriculture and then to industry has condemned us to living unnatural lives cannot give full cannot give full expression to our inherent inclination and instincts, and therefore cannot satisfy our deepest yearnings. Nothing in the comfortable world of the urban middle class can approach the wild excitement and cheer experienced by forager band on a successful remote hunt. Every new invention, every new invention just put another mile between us and the Garden of Eden. Yet this romantic insistence on seeing a dark shadow behind each invention is as dogmatic as belief in the inevitability of progress. Perhaps we are out of touch with our inner together, but not at all. It's not all bad. For instance, over the last 2 centuries, modern medicine have decreased child mortality from 33% to less than 5%. Can anyone doubt that this made a huge contribution to the happiness not only of those children would have otherwise so their families and friends? A more nuanced position takes the middle road. Until the scientific revolution, there was no clear correlation between power and happiness. Medieval peasants may indeed have been more miserable than their hunter-gatherer forebears, but in the last few centuries, humans have learned to use their capacities more wisely. The returns of modern medicine are just one example. Other unprecedented achievements include the steep drop in violence, the virtual disappearance of international wars, and the near elimination of large-scale famines. Yet this too is an oversimplification. Firstly, it bases its optimistic assessment on a very small sample of years. The majority of humans began to enjoy the fruit of modern medicine no later than 1850, and drastic drop in child mortality is a 20th century phenomenon. Mass famines continued to blight much of humanity up to the middle of the 20th century. During communist China's Great Leap Forward of 1958-61, somewhere between 10 and 50 million human beings starved to death. International wars became rare only after 1945, largely thanks to the new threat of nuclear annihilation. Hence, though the last few decades have been an unprecedented golden age of humanity, is it too early to know whether this represents a fundamental shift in currents of history or an ephemeral eddy for good fortune? When ephemeral, P I think it looks like exciting, right? Temporary, momentary, ephemeral, eddy for transient. When judging modernity, it is all too tempting to take the viewpoint of 21st century middle class Western. We must not forget the viewpoints of 19th century Welsh coal miner, Chinese opium addict, or Tasmanian Aborigine Turganini is no less important than Homer Simpson. Secondly, even the brave golden age of the last century may turn out to have sown the seeds of future catastrophe. Over the last few decades, we have been disturbing the ecological equilibrium of our planet in myriad new ways. In so many new ways, and with what seem likely to dire consequences. A lot of evidence indicate that we are destroying the foundation of human prosperity in orgy of reckless consumption. Finally, we can congratulate ourselves on the unprecedented accomplishment of modern sapiens only if we completely ignore the fate of all other animals. Much of the wanted Rented material wealth that shield us from disease and famine was accumulated at the expense of labor at Raven keys, dairy cows, and conveyor belt chickens. Over the last 2 centuries, tens of billions of animals have been subjected to a regime of industrial exploitation whose cruelty has no precedent in the annals of literature. If we accept a mere tenth of what animal rights activists are claiming, then modern industrial agriculture might well be the greatest crime in history. When evaluating global happiness, it is wrong to count the happiness only of the upper class or Europeans or women, and it is also wrong to consider only the happiness of humans. Okay, it has been talked up, celebrated, or hyped up. Okay, the next topic is counting happiness. According to me, we should consider happiness of each being. Continuing happiness. So far, we have discussed happiness as a word largely a product of material factors such as health, diet, and wealth. If people are richer and healthier, they must also be happier. But is that really so obvious? Philosophers, priests, and poets have brooded over the nature of happiness for millennia, and many have concluded that social, ethical, and spiritual factors have has have have as great an impact on our happiness as material conditions. Brooded over. Okay, brooded. Yes, being quietly absorbed in our thoughts. Okay. Perhaps people in modern affluent societies suffer greatly from alienation and meaningless despite their prosperity, and perhaps are less well-to-do ancestors found much contentment in community, religion, and a bond with nature. In recent decades, psychologists, biologists have taken up the challenge of studying scientifically what really makes people happy. Is it money, family, genetics, or perhaps virtue? The first step is to define what disturbing is it. To generally accept a definition of happiness as a subjective well-being. Happiness, according to this view, is something I feel elsewhere myself in the sense of whether immediate pleasure or long-term contentment. With the way my life is going, if it's something felt inside, how it can be measured from outside? Generally, we can do so by asking people to tell us how they feel. So, psychologists and biologists who want to assess how happy people feel give them questionnaires or to fill out and tell the results. A typical subjective well-being questionnaire asks interviews to grade on a scale of 0 or 10 their agreement with statements such as I feel pleased with the way I am. I feel that life is very rewarding. I'm optimistic about the future and life is good. The researcher then adds up all the answers and concludes the interview's general level of subjective well-being. Such questionnaires are used in order to correlate happiness with various objective factors. One study might compare 1,000 people who earn $100 a year with 1,000 people who earn $50,000. If the study discovered that the first group has an average subjective well-being level of 8.7 while the latter has an average only of 23, the researcher may reasonably conclude that there is a positive correlation between wealth and subjective well-being. To put it in simple English, money brings more happiness. This is a method can be used to examine whether people living in democracies are happier than people in dictatorships and whether married people are happier than singles versus widows. This provides a grounding for students who can examine wealth, political freedom, and diverse rates in the past. If people are happier in democracies and married people are happier than divorces, a student has a basis for arguing that democratization process of the last few decades contribute to the happiness of humankind. It is the growing rate progress indicates a positive trend. This way of thinking is not flawless, but if before pointing out some of the holes, it is worth considering the findings. An interesting conclusion is that money does indeed bring happiness, but only up to a point, and beyond that point, it has little significance for people stuck at the bottom of the economic ladder. More money means greater happiness. If you are American, a single mother earning 12,000 a year, cleaning house, and you suddenly win $500 $500,000 in the lottery, you will probably experience a significant long-term surge in your subjective well-being. Okay. Money is indeed bring happiness, but only certain point beyond that it is significant. Yeah. Money का demand of every happiness. Okay. However, you will be feel to, you will be able to feed and clothe your children without thinking further into that. But if you are a top executive earning $50,000 a year and you win 1 million lottery, you company board suddenly said to make well, your salary yourself is likely to last only a few weeks. According to empirical finding, it's almost certainly not going to make a big difference to the way you feel over the long run. You will buy a snazzier car, move into like a home, get used to drinking Chitio Petras instead of California car cabinet. So all seeing routine is exceptional. Okay, snazzier, move into political, snazzier, snazzier car. Fleshy. Palatal. Pala. Describes home or spaces that are impressively large and lavish. Another interesting finding is that illness decreases happiness in the short term. It is a source of long-term distress only if the person's condition constantly deteriorating or the disease involves ongoing or debilitating pain. People who are diagnosed with chronic illness such as diabetes are usually depressed for a while, but if the illness does not worse, they adjust to their new conditions and they rate illness as highly as healthy people do. Imagine that Lucy and Leo Carmental class twins who agreed to take part in the subjective well-being study. On the way back from psychology, Lucy's car is hit by a bus, leaving her with a number of broken bones and permanently lame leg. Just as the rescue crew is putting her out of the wreckage and the phone rings, Luke shouts that he has won the lottery. He has won the lottery in jackpot. 2 years later, she will be limping and he will be a lot richer. But when the psychologist comes around for a follow-up study, they're more likely to give the same answer they written on the morning of that fateful day. Family and community seem to have more impact on our happiness than money and health. Okay. People with strong families will live in a tight knit, a supportive community. Seemingly happy than people who family are dysfunctional or who have never found a community to be part of. It will be important. Repeated studies have found that there is very close correlation between good marriages and high subjective well-being and between bad marriages and misery. This holds true in respect of economic or even physical conditions and impecunious. Invalid surrounded. Impecunious. Pecunious. That's a fancy way to say someone is broke, but it means little or low money. Invalid surrounded by a loving spouse. A devoted family and a warm community may feel better than an alienated billionaire. And its annual poverty is not as severe than its illness and it's not degenerative or painful. This raises the possibility that immense improvement in material conditions over the last 2 years was offset by the collapse of family and the community. If so, the average person might well be no happier today than in 1800. When the freedom we value so highly in says, we can choose our spouses, friends, and neighbors, but we can choose to leave us. With the individual wielding unprecedented power, just as with her own path in life, we found it ever harder to make commitments. We thus live in an increasingly lonely world of unraveling communities and families. But the most important finding of all is that Happiness does not really depend on objective conditions, whether wealth, health, or even community. Rather, it depends on the correlation between objective conditions and subjective expectations. If you want a bullock cart and get a bullock cart, you are content. If you want a brand new Ferrari and get only a second-hand Fiat, or if you feel deprived, this is why winning the lottery is over time. Over time, the same impact on people's happiness as a debil- debilitating car accident. Debilitating car accident. It will reduce on severity to cope. Crippling, devastating. So when things improve, exceptions balloon and consumer even dramatic improvements in objective conditions can leave us dissatisfied. When things deteriorate, expectations change, and consequently when a severe illness might leave you pretty much as happy as you before. You might say that we didn't need a bunch of psychologists or nutritionary to discover this. Prophets, poets, and philosophers realized thousands of years ago that being satisfied with what you already have is far improved than getting more of what you want. Still, it's nice when modern research bolster the lots of numbers and charts reaching the same conclusion the ancient did. That then the, the really is far more important than getting more of what you want. The crucial importance of human expectations has far-reaching implication for understanding the history of happiness. If happiness depended only on objective conditions such as wealth, health, and social relation, it would have been relatively easy to investigate its history. The finding that it's dependent on subjective expectations makes the task of historians far harder. We moderns have an arsenal of tranquilizers and painkillers at our disposal, but our expectations of ease and pleasure and our intolerance to inconvenience and discomfort have increased to such an extent that we may fail suffer from pain more than unnecessary. It's hard to accept this line of thinking. The problem is a fallacy of reasoning embedded in our psyches. When we try to guess or imagine how happy other people are now or people in the past were, we inevitably imagine ourselves in their shoes. But they don't. But that won't work because it based our expectations on the material conditions of others. In modern affluent society, it is customary to take a shower and change your clothes every day. Medieval peasants went without washing for months and hardly ever changed their clothes. The very thought of living like that, filthy and reeking to the bone, is abhorrent to us. बहुत ही गंदा, abhorrent. Extremely repugnant, hateful, disgusting. Extremely disgusting. Yet medieval peasants seems not to have minded. They were used to feel the and smell of a long and embroidered shirt. It's not that they wanted a change of clothes, but they had what they wanted. So at least as far as clothing goes, they were content. That's not surprising when you think of it. After all, our Japanese cousins seldom wash or never change their clothes. Not are we disgusted by the fact that our pet dogs and cats don't shower and change their coat daily. We bathe, hug, and kiss them all the same. Same small children in affluent society often dislike showering. It takes the year of education and parental discipline to adopt this supposedly attractive custom. It is all a matter of expectations. If happiness is determined, if happiness is then two pillars of society, mass media and advertising industry may unwittingly be depleting the global reservoir of contentment. If you were, were an 18-year-old young in yet in a small village 1,000 years ago, you probably think you were good looking because you were only 50 other men in your village, and most of them were either old, scared, or wrinkled, or still little kids. But if you are a teenager today, you are a lot more likely to feel inadequate. Even if the other guys at the school are an reload, you don't want to measure yourself against them but against the movie stars, athletes, and supermodels. You see all day on televisions, Facebook, and billboards. So maybe third world. This content is fomented not only by poverty, disease, corruption, and political oppression, but also by mere exposure to first world standards. The average Egyptian was far less likely to die from starvation, plague, or violence under Hosni Mubarak than Ramsto or Cleopatra. Never had the material condition of most Egyptian being sober. You think they would have been dancing in the streets in 2011 thinking aloud for their fortune. Instead, they rose up furiously to overthrow Mubarak. They weren't comparing themselves to their ancestor and their pharaoh, but rather to their contemporaries in the Babas of America. If that's the case, immortality might lead to discontent. Suppose science comes up with cures of all diseases, effectively anti-aging therapies and degenerative that keep people indefinitely young. In all likelihood, the immediate result will be an unprecedented epidemic of anxiety and anger. Those unable to afford the new miracle treatment, the vast majority of people will be beside themselves with rage. Throughout history, the poor and oppressed comfort themselves with the thought of that at least death is even handed, that the rich and powerful will also die. The poor will not be comfortable with the thought that they have to die, while the rich will remain young and beautiful forever. But the tiny minority able to afford the new treatments will not be euphoric either. They will have much to be anxious about. Although the new therapies could extend life and yet they cannot revive cause. How dreadful to think that I and my loved ones can live forever. Only if we don't get hit by a truck or blown to its smithers or by terrorists. Potentially immortal people are likely to grow worse, taking even the slightest risk, and agony of losing a spouse, child, or close friends will be unbearable. Chemical happiness. Social scientists distribute subjective well-being questionnaires and correlate the result with socio-economic factors such as wealth and political freedom. Biologists use the same questionnaires but correlate the answer people with biochemical and genetic factors. Their findings are shocking. Biologists hold that our mental and emotional world is governed by biochemical mechanisms shaped by millions of years of evolution. Like all other mental states, our subjective well-being is not determined by external parameters such as salary, social relations, or political rights. Rather, it is determined by complex system of nerves, neurons, synapses, and various biochemical substances such as serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. Nobody is ever mad happy by winning a lottery, buying a house, getting a promotion, or even finding true love. People are made happy by one thing and one thing only: pleasant sensation in their body. A person who just won the lottery or found new love jumps for joy is not really reaching to the money or love, whether she is reacting to various hormones coursing through her bloodstream with a strong electric signal flashing between different parts of her brain. Unfortunately, for all hopes of creating heaven on earth, our internal biochemical system seems to be programmed to keep happiness levels relatively constant. There is no natural selection for happiness as such as happy humid genetic line will go extinct as the genes of pair of anxious parents get carried on the next generations. Happiness and misery play a role in evolution only to the extent that they encourage or discourage survival and reproduction. Perhaps it's not surprising that the evolution has molded us into to be neither too miserable nor too happy. It enables to enjoy a momentary rush of pleasant sensation, but these don't last forever. Sooner or later, they subside and give place to unpleasant sensation. For example, evolution provided pleasant feelings as rewards to males who spread their genes by having sex with the fertile females. If sex were not accompanied by such pleasure, few males would bother. At the same time, evolution made sure that these pleasant feelings quickly subside. If orgasms were to last forever, the very happy males would die of hunger or for lack of interest in food and would not take the trouble to look for additional fertile females. Some scholars compare biochemistry to an air conditioning system that keeps the temperature constant come heat wave or snow wave. Even might momentarily change the temperature, but the air conditioning system always returns the temperature to the same set point. Some air conditioning systems are set at 25 degrees Celsius, others are set at 20 degrees. Human happiness conditioning systems also differ from person to person. On a scale from 1 to 10, some people are born with a cheerful biochemical system that allows their mood to swing between level 6 and 10, stabilizing with time at 8. Such a person is quite happy even if she lives in an alienating big city, loses all her money in a stock exchange crash, or is diagnosed with diabetes. Other people are cursed with a gloomy biochemistry with the swings between 3 and 7 and stabilizes at 5. Such an unhappy person remains depressed even if he enjoys the support of a tight knit community when millions in Britain is healthy as an Olympic athlete. Indeed, even if our puny friend win $50 million in the morning, discover the cure for both AIDS and cancer by noon, makes peace between his rivals until staying that afternoon, and then in the winning routine. Her long lost child would disappear years ago. She would still be incapable of experiencing anything beyond level 7 happiness. Her brain is simply not built for exhilaration, come what may. Think for a moment for your family and friends. You know, some people who remain relatively joyful no matter what befell them, and then they were those who always disgruntled, no matter what gifts the world lays at their feet. We tend to believe that if we could just change our workplace, we could marry to finish writing that novel, buy a new car, or repay the mortgage, we would be on top of the world. Yet, when we get what we desire, we don't seem to be any happier. Buying cars and writing novels do not change our biochemistry. They can startle it for a fleeting moment, but it is soon back to its set point. What biology? Creating balance. So, okay, how can this be squared with above mentioned psychological and sociological findings that, for example, married people are happier on average than single? First, these findings are correlation in the direction of causation may be the opposite of what some researchers have assumed. It is true that married people are happier than single and divorces, but that doesn't necessarily mean that marriage produces happiness. It could be that happiness causes happiness causes marriage, or more correctly, that serotonin, dopamine, or oxytocin bring about and maintain marriage. People who are born with cheerful biochemistry are generally happy and content. Such people are more attractive spouses, and consequently, they have a greater chance of getting married. They are also less likely to divorce because it's far easier to live with a happy and content spouse than with a depressed and dissatisfied one. Consequently, it's true that married people are happier on average than single, but a single woman prone to being because of their biochemistry would not necessarily become happier if she were to cope with her husband. In addition, most biologists are not fanatics. They maintain that happiness is determined mainly by chemistry, but they agree that psychological and social factors also have their place. Our mental conditioning system and our brains. Some freedom of movement within predefined borders is also impossible. It is almost impossible to exceed the upper and lower of emotionalities, but marriage and divorce can have impact in the two. Somebody born with an average of level 5 happiness would never dance wildly in distress. But a good marriage should never attention will turn from time to time over the despondency of level 3. If we accept the biological approach to happiness, then history turns out to be of minor importance since most historical events have had no impact on our biochemistry. History can change the external stimuli because returning to these graded. It does not make change the resulting certain level as it cannot make people happier. Compare a medieval French peasant to a modern Persian banker. The peasant lived in an unheated mud hut overlooking the local pigsty, while the banker goes home to a splendid penthouse with all the latest technological gadgets and a view of the Champs Elysees. Intuitively, we would expect the banker to be much happier than the peasant. However, mud huts, penthouse, and the Champs Elysees do not really determine our mood. Serotonin does. Serotonin. The thing is, when the medieval peasant completed the construction of his mud, his brain neurons secreted serotonin, bringing it up to level X. When in 2014, the banker made the last payment on his wonderful penthouse, brain neurons secreted a similar amount of serotonin, bringing up to X. No difference with brain that the penthouse is far more comfortable than the mud house. But the only thing that matters is that present the level of serotonin is X. Consequently, the banker would not be one hour happier than his great grandfather and the poor medieval peasant. This is true not only of private life but also of great collective events. Take for example the French Revolution. The revolutionaries were busy. They executed the king, gave land to the peasants, declared the right of man, abolished the British, and waged war against the whole of Europe. Yet none of that changed French biochemistry. Consequently, despite all the political, social, and ideological and economical upheavals brought about by the revolution, its impact on French happiness was small. Those who wanted cheerful biochemistry and theoretic glory were just as happy before the revolution as after. Those with the gloomy biochemistry complained about Robespierre and Napoleon with the same bitterness with which Earlier complained about the 16 and maybe entered near it. If so, what good was the French Revolution? And people did not. If people did not become any happier, then what was the point of all that chaos? Fear, blood, and war. Biologists would never have stormed the Bastille. People think that this political revolution or that social reform will make them happy, but the biochemistry just tricks them time to time again. Okay, so yeah. There is only one historical development that has real significance today. When we finally realize that the keys to happiness are in the hands of our biochemical system, we can stop wasting our time on politics and social reforms, purchase and ideologies, and focus instead only on the one thing that can make us truly happy, manipulating our biochemistry. If we invest billion in understanding our brain, chemistry and developing appropriate treatment, we can make people far happier than ever before without any need of revolutions. Prozac, for example, doesn't change regimes, but by raising serotonin level, it lifts people out of their depressions. Nothing captures the biological argument better than the famous New Age slogan, happiness begins within. So, happiness begins within. Money, social status, plastic surgery, beautiful houses, powerful positions, none of these will bring your happiness. Lasting happiness comes only from serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. And Aldous Huxley's dystopian novel, Brave New World, published in 1982 at the height of Great Depression, happiness is the supreme value and psychiatric drug replaces the plus and the ballot as the foundation of politics. Every day, each person takes a dose of soma, a synthetic drug which makes people happy without harming their productivity and efficiency. The world state that once the entire globe is never threatened by wars, revolutions, strikes, or demonstrations because all people are supremely content with their current conditions, whatever they may be. Huxley's vision of the future is far more troubling than George Orwell's 1984. Huxley's world seems monstrous to most readers, but it's hard to explain why. But everybody is happy all the time. What could be wrong with that? Crazy. What a question. What a thoughtful question. Then what is the meaning of life? And the next topic is the meaning of life. So yeah, Huxley's this guy. Huxley. Huxley's this consulting world is based on the biological assumption that happiness equals pleasures. To be happy is no more or less than experiencing pleasant bodily sensations. Since our biochemistry limits the volume and duration of these sensations, the only way to make people experience high level of happiness over an extended period of time is to manipulate their biochemical system. But the definition of happiness is contested by some scholars. In a famous study, Daniel Kahneman, winner of Nobel Prize in Economics, asked people to recount a typical workday, going through it episode by episode and evaluating how much they enjoyed or disliked each moment. He discovered what seemed to be paradox in most people's views of their lives. He seemed he discovered what seemed to be paradox in most take the work involved in raising a child. Kahneman found that when counting moments of joy and moments of drudgery, bringing up a child turned out to be a rather unpleasant affair. It consists largely of changing your own pace, washing dishes, and dealing with temper tantrums, which nobody likes to do. Yet most parents declare that their children are their chief source of happiness. Does it mean that people don't really know what's good for them? That's one option. Another is that the finding demonstrates that happiness is not the surplus of pleasant over unpleasant moments. Rather, happiness consists in seeing one's life in its entirety as meaningful and worthwhile. There is an important cognitive and ethical component of happiness. To our values make all the differences to whether we see ourselves as miserable slaves to a baby dictator or a lovingly nurturing a new life. As Netzi put it, if you have a why to live, you can bear almost anyhow. A meaningful life can be extremely satisfying even in the midst of hardship, whereas a meaningless life, and a terrible ordeal, no matter how comfortable it is. Ordeal. Though people in all cultures and eras have felt the same type of places and pains, same type of places and pains, the meaning they have ascribed to their experience have probably varied widely. If so, the history of happiness might have been far more trouble-bound than biologists imagine. It's a conclusion that doesn't necessarily favor modernity. Assessing life minute by minute, medieval people certainly had it rough. However, if they had believed the promise of everlasting bliss in the afterlife, they may have well have viewed their life as far more meaningful and worthwhile than modern secular people who, in the long term, can expect nothing but complete and meaningless oblivion. Ask, are you satisfied with your life as a whole? People in the Middle Ages might have scored quite highly in subjective well-being questionnaire. So our medieval ancestors were happy because they found meaning into life and collective delusion about the afterlife. Yes, as long as nobody punctured their fantasies, why shouldn't they? As far as we can tell from a purely scientific viewpoint, human life has absolutely no meaning. Humans are the outcome of planned evolutionary process. They operate without goal or purpose. Our actions are not part of some divine cosmic plan, and if the planet Earth were to blow up tomorrow morning, the universe would probably keep going about its business as usual. As far as we can tell at this point, humans objectively would not be missed. Hence, any meaning that people ascribe to their lives is just a delusion. The other worldly meanings medieval people found in their lives were no more diluted than the humanist, nationalist, and capitalist meanings modern people find. The scientist who says her life is meaningful because she increases the store of human knowledge. The soldier who declared that his life is meaningful because the fight to find his homeland. And the entrepreneur who find meaning in the building a new company are no less delusional than their medieval counterparts who found meaning in reading scriptures, going on a crusade or building a new cathedral. Scriptures. So perhaps happiness is synchronizing my personal delusions of meaning with the prevailing collective delusions. As long as my personal narrative is in line with the narratives of people around me, I can convince myself that my life is meaningful and find happiness in that conviction. This is quite a depressing conclusion. Does happiness really depend on self delusion? Oh, crazy, bro. Permanent revolution में mostly the talk क्या they talk about it's common in India, the collapse of family and community, family, rise of nationalism, um, capitalism. What actually is happiness? Happiness and meaning of life, end of Homo sapiens. Okay, know thyself, know yourself. Okay, let me read this. Okay, five. So yeah, know yourself. If happiness is based on feeling pleasant sensations, then in order to be happier, we need to be re-engineer our biological systems. If happiness is based on feeling that life is meaningful, then in order to be happier, we need to delude ourselves more effectively. Is there a third alternative? Both above views share the assumption that happiness is some sort of subjective feeling, and that in order to judge people's happiness, we all need to do is ask them how they feel. To many of us, that seems biological because dominant religion for age is liberalism. Liberalism sanctifies the subjective feeling of individual. It views these feelings as the supreme source of authority. What is good and what is bad, what is beautiful and what is ugly, what ought to be bad, what ought to be and what ought not to be, are all determined by what each one of us feels. Liberal politics is based on the idea that voters know best, voters know best, and voters know best, and there is no need for Big Brother to tell us what is good for us. Liberal economics is based on the idea that customer is always right. Liberal art declares that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. A student in the liberal school and university are taught to think for themselves. Commercial urges to just do it, just to it. Action film stage dramas, so operas, novels, and catchy pop songs indoctrinate us constantly. Be true to yourself, listen to yourself, follow your heart. Jean Jacques Rousseau stated this view most classically: what I feel to be good is good, what I feel to be bad is bad. What a different type of logical reasoning and philosophies. So everything is created by humans. So according to me, what I follow is what I follow, right? I feel to be good, then it's good. Okay. People who have been raised from infancy on a diet of such slogan are prone to believe that happiness is a subjective feeling and that each individual best knows whether she is happy or miserable. Yet this view is unique liberalism. Most religions and ideologies throughout history stated that there are objective yardsticks. There are objective yardsticks for goodness and beauty and for all things orderly. They were suspicious of the feeling and preferences of the ordinary person. At the entrance of the temple of Apollo at Delhi, pilgrims were greeted by inscription, "Know yourself." The implication was that the average person is ignorant of his true self and therefore likely to be ignorant of true happiness. Food were probably incurred. As so would Christian theologians St. Paul and St. Augustine knew perfectly well that if you asked people about it, most of them would prefer to have sex than pray to God. Thus, that proved that having sex is the key to happiness, not a cognitive Paul and Einstein. It was only that humankind is sinful by nature and that people are easily reduced by Satan. From a Christian viewpoint, the vast majority of people are in more or less the same situation as heroin addicts. Binet, a psychologist, embarks on a study of happiness among drug users. He polls them and finds that they declare, every single one of them, that they are only happier when they shoot up. But the psychologists published a paper declaring that heroin is the key to happiness. The idea that feelings are not to be trusted is not restricted to Christianity, at least when it comes to the value of feelings. Even Darwin and Richard Dawkins find common ground with St. Paul and St. Augustine. According to the selfish gene theory, natural selection makes people, like other organisms, choose what is good for the reproduction for their genes, even if it's bad for them as individuals. What is good for the reproduction of their genes, even if it's bad for them individuals. Paradoxically, while psychological studies of subjective well-being rely on people's ability to diagnose their happiness correctly, the basic resonatory of psychotherapy is that people don't really know themselves and they need professional help to free themselves of self-destructive behaviors. Most males spend their lives toiling, worrying, competing, and fighting instead of enjoying peaceful bliss because their DNA manipulates them for its own selfish aims. Like Southern DNA uses fleeting pleasure to tempt people and place them in its power. Most religions and philosophies have consequently taken a very different approach to happiness than liberalism does. The Buddhist position is particularly interesting. Buddhism has assigned the question of happiness more importance than perhaps any other human creed. For 2,500 years, Buddhists have systematically studied the essence and causes of happiness, which is why there is a growing interest among the scientific community both in their philosophy and their meditation practices. Buddhism shares the basic insight of biological approach to happiness, namely that happiness results from process occurring within one's body and not from events in the outside world. However, starting from the same insight, Buddhism reaches very different conclusions. According to the Buddhism, most people identify happiness with pleasant feelings while identifying suffering with unpleasant feelings. People consequently ascribe immense importance to what they feel, craving to experience more and more pleasures while avoiding pain. Whatever we do throughout our lives, whether it's scratching our leg, fidgeting slightly in the chair, or fighting world wars, we are just trying to get pleasant feelings. The problem, according to Buddhism, is that our feelings are no more than fleeting vibrations, changing every moment, like the ocean waves. If 5 minutes ago I felt joyful and purposeful, now those feelings are gone and I might felt sad and dejected. So if I wanted to experience pleasant feeling, I have to constantly chase them while driving away the unpleasant feeling. Even if I succeed, I immediately have to start all over again without ever getting any lasting reward for my troubles. What is so important about obtaining such ephemeral prizes? Why struggle so hard to achieve something that disappears almost as soon as it rises? According to Buddhism, the root of suffering is neither the feeling of pain nor the sadness or nor even of meaninglessness. Rather, the real root of suffering is this: Rather, the real root of suffering is this never ending and pointless pursuit of ephemeral feelings. Due to this pursuit, used to be in constant state of tension, restlessness, and dissatisfaction. Due to this pursuit, the mind is never satisfied, even when experiencing pleasure. It is not content because it fears this feeling might soon disappear and craves that this feeling should stay and intensify. People are liberated from suffering not when they experience this or that fleeting pleasure, but rather when they understand the impermanent nature of all their feelings and stop craving them. This is the aim of Buddhist meditation practices. In meditation, you are supposed to closely observe your mind and body, witness the ceaseless arising and passing of all your feelings, and realize how pointless is how pointless it is to pursue them. When the pursuit stops, the mind becomes very relaxed, clear, and satisfied. All kind of feelings go on, rising and passing, joy, anger, boredom, lust. But once you stop craving particular feeling, you can just accept them for what they are. You live in the present moment instead of fantasizing about what might have been. Happy. The resulting serenity is so profound that those who spend their lives in the frenzied pursuit of pleasant feeling can hardly imagine it. It is like a man standing for decades on the seashore, embracing certain good views and trying to prevent them from disintegrating, by simultaneously pushing back bad views to prevent them from getting near him. Day in, day out, the man stands on the beach, driving himself crazy with his fruitless exercise. Eventually, he sits down on the sand and just allow the waves to come and go as they please. How peaceful. Yes, Buddhism has a lot of power, right? That's why the people are means yeah. That's why the people are more attracted to our Buddhism, but because the teachings of the Buddhism are so great about happiness. The main goal is all the suffering are from inside only. If we'll yeah. So this idea is so alien to modern liberalism culture that when Western New Age movement encountered with this insight, they translated them into liberal terms, thereby turning them on their head. New Age cult frequently argue happiness doesn't depend on external condition; it depends only on what we feel inside. People should stop pursuing external achievements such as wealth and status and connect instead with their inner feelings, or more succinctly, happiness begins within. This is actually what biologists argue, but more or less the opposite of what Buddha said. Buddha agreed with modern biology and New Age movement that happiness is independent of external condition. Yet, is more important and far more profound insight was that true happiness is also independent of our inner feelings. Indeed, the more significance we give our feeling, the more we crave them, and the more we suffer. Buddha's recommendation was to stop not only the pursuit of external achievement but also the pursuit of inner feelings. Okay, to sum up, subjective well-being questionnaires intensify our well-being with our subjective feeling and identify the pursuit of happiness with the pursuit of particular emotional states. In contrast, for many traditional philosophies and religions such as Buddhism, the key to happiness is to know the truth about yourself, to understand who or what you really are. Most people wrongly identify themselves with their feelings, thoughts, likes, and dislikes. When they feel anger and they think I'm angry, this is my anger, they consequently spend their life avoiding some kind of feelings and pursuing others. When they realize that they are not their feelings, that their relentless pursuit of a particular feeling just traps them in misery. If this is so, then our entire understanding of the history of happiness might be misguided. Maybe it isn't so important whether people's expectations are fulfilled or whether they enjoy pleasant feelings. The main question is whether people know the truth about themselves. What evidence do we have that people today understand this truth any better than ancient forager or medieval persons? The scholars began to study the history of happiness only a few years ago, and we are still formulating initial hypotheses and searching for appropriate research methods. It's, it's much too early to adopt rigid conclusion and a debate that's hardly yet begun. What is important is to get to know as many different approaches as possible as to ask the right questions. Most history books focus on the idea of great thinkers, the bravery of warriors, the charity of saints, and the creativity of artists. They have much to tell about the weaving and unraveling of social structures, about the rise and the fall of empires, about the discovery and the spread of new technologies. Yet they say nothing about how all this influenced the happiness and suffering of individuals. This is the biggest lacuna in our understanding of history. We're just starting filling it. The biggest lacuna. Okay, biggest gap. Okay, so yeah, the chapter 19 is over, and tomorrow we'll read the last chapter of this book, the end of Homo sapiens. So yeah, we'll revise today's. So let's revise today's words. Yeah, apocalyptic, related to the end of the world or total destruction, naivety, innocence. Okay, lucrative, profitable, and financially rewarding. Ephemeral, lasting a very short time. Wanted, praise or boastly about. They wanted. Brooded, thought deeply, often gloomily and anxiously. Sneezier, more stylish or flashy, palatal, grand, luxurious, and lavish homes. Impecunious, having little or no money. Debilitating, causing nervous weakness or impairment. Causing serious weakness. Abhorrent, extremely repugnant or extremely disgusting, right? Like a gap in the in our understanding, right? Void. Okay. Thank you so much. Please like, share, and subscribe to my video. I will, I will be reading this book, and I will continue this playlist or regularly for a longer period of time. So please follow me. You will learn a lot, and I will also learn a lot, and you will also learn some knowledges from the books. Thank you so much. Please like, share, and subscribe to me. Thank you. Now, okay.